Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Alex Steele, Bloomberg TV anchor, and on behalf of our New Voices program and the Smithsonian's American Women's History Initiative, I'd like to welcome you to the Women in the Room. Now, it would be impossible to have this session and to talk about our long march towards gender equality and equal protection for all Americans under the law without acknowledging Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the solicitor for the feminist movement, and later as a federal circuit judge and ultimately Supreme Court justice. RBG spent her long career enshrining equal protection on the basis of sex within the justice system, and she broke down barriers that limited women from serving on juries, securing workplace benefits, and even things like obtaining credit cards. Her pioneering work helped to change the narrative of what it meant to be a woman in America. And while she will be remembered as one of the greatest legal minds for much of her career, Ginsburg was quite literally and often the only woman in the room. Now, as we know, being the only woman is not unique to the courtroom. We also see it in the boardroom as well. And we have designed today's program as a virtual celebration of powerful female executives in business and finance, helping to achieve gender equality and inspire the next generation of women as corporate leaders. The Women in the Room will take us on a journey from the past with a look at artifacts from female pioneers in finance on view at the Smithsonian to the present through a riveting panel of 3 top women in corporate America and into the future with a look at the New Voices program, which has provided media training to over 250 women and ethnically diverse executives, giving them tools to become the next generation of experts and speakers on matters of the economy and markets. Now, I've talked to many graduates of the New Voices program, and what really stood out to me is that it gives them a voice in their firm, the ability and credibility to speak up, and a media presence with more weight with their colleagues. It's a huge game changer for them. We're also going to look further into the future at other successful initiatives that inspire girls to pursue careers in business and build the pipeline of leaders that will chair the boardrooms of tomorrow. Now, to kick it off, please welcome Lonnie G. Bunch, the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian Museum.
Hello, I'm Lonnie Bunch, the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. And on behalf of the entire institution, I'd like to welcome you to the Women in the Room, presented by the Smithsonian Women's History Initiative and Bloomberg New Voices. I'm thrilled that this partnership is bringing us together to discuss the ways our organization can amplify women's voices and push for gender parity in business and finance. How can organizations boost their women's leadership in boardrooms, in the C-suite, and across every level of management? You'll hear from the industry's leading women about the policies and programs that are working today. And through artifacts from the National Museum of American History's The Only One in the Room exhibition, we'll explore historical lessons from the trailblazers who paved the way for progress. Tonight, I think of one of my all-time favorite objects at the Smithsonian, a Madam C.J. Walker pin. Pins like these, with her image emblazoned on them, were given out at conferences to the women of Walker's sales force. The daughter of slaves, Walker launched a thriving business in women's cosmetic and hair products in the early 20th century, becoming the wealthiest self-made Black women in the country. Walker seized an opportunity in a marginalized area, Black women's beauty, and built an empire. She revolutionized the industry and proved that business was her game. I love this story. To me, Madam C.J. Walker proves that women have always belonged in the room. The Smithsonian aims to represent the full range of the American experience. And we know that for too long in this country, women's roles and contributions have gone unrecognized. Candidly, it is still true today. Women are underrepresented in leadership in almost any field you can name. Through the Women's History Initiative, the Smithsonian hopes to offer a long overdue corrective. The initiative deepens our understanding and appreciation of women's contributions throughout history and today. It amplifies stories like Madam C.J. Walker's as an example of ingenuity, shrewdness, and perseverance. And most importantly, the initiative engages future generations of female leaders, inspiring them to follow and define their own inventive spirit. As you know, this year marks a turning point in the struggle for women's equality, 100 years since the passage of the 19th Amendment. Throughout the year, as we've celebrated this historic milestone, we've also reflected on the lessons of the moment. We've acknowledged the complexity of the suffrage movement and those it left behind. And we recognize how far we've come in the struggle for women's rights, but we also realize how much work still lies ahead. On a personal note, I should say that I know many of us are still reeling from the recent passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a dazzling legal mind and a fierce voice for equality who demanded that our country live up to its stated ideals. As we grieve, we also know that the best way to honor her legacy is to pick up the torch, to follow her example, to lift up the phenomenal voices around us, and to build towards change. Tonight is a step in that direction. The leaders that you'll hear from bring their own extraordinary stories and unique perspectives. Thank you to everyone who made tonight possible, and thank you to everyone for joining us in this important work. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. So inspiring. So to set the stage for our discussion, Smithsonian curators of the exhibit, The Only One in the Room, will walk us through 3 pieces that help tell the stories of the female pioneers who paved the way for women leaders in business and finance.
Hi, I'm Crystal Moten, curator in the Division of Work and Industry at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. The centennial of women's suffrage in the United States presents an awesome opportunity to pause for reflection. The Smithsonian Institution has made changes in who they hire, what they collect, and the stories they tell. Here at the National Museum of American History, we opened our American Enterprise exhibit in 2015, and it features the prominent role that women have played in business. The achievements of women in finance is shown from Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte, one of the richest women in early America, to Rosalind Brewer, CEO of Sam's Club in 2015 and the COO of Starbucks today.
The younger community, sometimes they never see anything but negative. And so if they can see a woman of color in a role of leadership, it becomes iconic for them. It becomes a place for them to dream. And so I want young girls to realize that the possibilities are big. They can be race car drivers. They can be astronauts. They can be CEOs.
Rosalind is amazing, but one of our favorite financial icons is from a slightly earlier time, and you all probably know her story, Muriel Siebert. Perhaps some of you were inspired by her. Muriel Siebert was a financial leader and a colorful individual. She started off in 1954 as a researcher for Bache & Co. for $65 a week. And by 1987, she was the first woman to buy a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. She paid more for her seat than men and faced a hostile work environment. She later established Muriel Siebert and Company and served as superintendent of banking for New York State. As a woman in the financial world, she often hit gender barriers, and her answer, like many women, was to work harder. She explained, "You create opportunities by performing, not complaining." Muriel Siebert put her heart and her soul into providing opportunities for girls so that one day they, as Rosalind Brewer also believed, would be able to see themselves as future financial world leaders. Muriel Siebert's greatest quote might be the simplest: take stands, take risk, take responsibility. And now you'll hear from my colleague, Peter Liebold.
Women have always worked, but their access to the top in all sectors of the economy has been limited. The financial industry has been especially difficult for women to make it to the top. Why is that so? Well, much of it is about the boys' club, both metaphoric and physical. Finance is a sector where information and networking are critical. However, women have largely been barred from the inner circle. Some of the exclusion is technologically driven. Beginning in the 1860s, stock tickers provided investors with ready access to market changes. The tickers were most often located in offices and men's clubs, making it difficult for women to participate. If women were allowed in the room, their role was often limited to reading the tape and posting the stock prices. In this wonderful drawing by J. Carroll Beckwith, you can see that Beckwith portrays finance as a female goddess. But instead of reading the ticker tape and making trades, the tape is wrapped around her body and holding her back. I doubt the symbolism was intended, but it is accurate. Earlier, Crystal spoke about Muriel Siebert and how she was the first woman to buy a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. One of the legendary stories about Siebert was her threat to have a porta potty delivered to the exchange if it did not have a women's restroom built. What is lost in most versions of that story is that she didn't threaten to deliver the porta potty to the exchange floor, but instead to the 7th floor, the home of the ultra-exclusive, members-only 1792 restaurant. In 2006, the restaurant was closed and turned into meeting rooms. In one of the ironies of life, part of the space that once spurned women and provided no restroom is now named the Siebert Room. Breaking into the upper levels of management is a challenge for women, and once they get there, they are not always treated equally. I would like to leave you with an important quote from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She worked tirelessly throughout her career for equality and summed it up saying, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made."
Thank you, Peter. We wanted to do an exhibit that presents the stories of women who have achieved success in business. We first thought that we would examine successful businesswomen through the lens of the glass ceiling. As we began to put together the list of women we would explore, we began to realize that the glass ceiling metaphor didn't actually explain or illuminate the experiences of all the women we were studying. And what we found is that for many of the women we studied, it was hard for them to make it through the door, let alone see a ceiling. And so we thought that it would be a better way to explain their struggles and their success by thinking about what they encountered when they entered their field. And that was them being the only one in the room. The women we examined in the Only One in the Room exhibit overcame very visible and tangible barriers. They dealt with, worked around, and worked within existing gender, racial, religious, ethnic, and class parameters. Despite overt discrimination, they had major breakthroughs and achievements. Magdalena Walker was the first Black woman in the nation to organize and run a bank. And she did it in the segregated South in the former capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia. Walker was born in 1864 to a formerly enslaved woman, and she didn't grow up with a silver spoon in her mouth. She literally grew up with a laundry basket on her head. Magdalena Walker joined the Independent Order of St. Luke as a youngster, and she rose through the ranks of the organization. Walker went to school at Richmond Colored Normal School, and she graduated and became a teacher. She soon married, and as the customs were at the time, because she got married, she had to give up her job teaching. But then she thrust herself into the work that she had been doing with the Independent Order of St. Luke. And this is where her story begins in the finance industry. As a leader in the Independent Order of St. Luke, she recognized that saving, that thrift, was really important for African Americans. And she thought that it would be a great idea to start an African American bank. She opened the bank, and along with the bank, the Independent Order of St. Luke opened a newspaper, a store. The bank was really successful, and she became known as a philanthropist because not only did she commit the bank to the needs of the Black community, she also gave lots of money to African American organizations in Richmond and in the nation. And so for Magdalena Walker and the Independent Order of St. Luke, which started the bank, the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank, what was really important was that people gave small amounts, pennies and nickels, and what these pennies and nickels added up to was success for the African American community.
We need that now. Well, now is my great pleasure to introduce three women who are in the room right now. Mellody Hobson, co-CEO and president of Ariel Investments, Dina Powell McCormick, a Goldman Sachs Management Committee member, and Michelle Peluso, SVP Digital Sales and Chief Marketing Officer at IBM. And if you're watching, please send questions that you'd like to ask our panelists through the Q&A tool in the lower left of your screen. We're hoping to leave about 10 minutes for that. We can ask some follow-up Q&As during the discussion. Let's just dive right in, ladies. In a perfect world, we'd all be sitting on a stage together having a really good time drinking some coffee and just, talking about our day, but that's not what's happening here because we're in COVID. So I wanted to start off just to set the tone for the day. And if there was a word that you could use to describe how you think of your journey to get where you are, and then maybe what you would see in a 22-year-old woman who's just kind of starting out and what you think the word might be for her, I think that might be a really good way to color our discussion. So I'm just going to go right down the line, and hopefully we can get into a place where I don't have to talk at all and you guys can just do all the work for me. Mellody, let's start with you and get your take on that.
Well, if I were, first of all, thank you for having me so much. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm on this panel with my pals, both of them. Dina and Michelle are both longtime friends of mine, so it's fun to do this together. I would say that my word for myself would be hard work. I know it's not one word, it's two. And my word for a 22-year-old starting their career would be the same. It would be hard work. I think that's the key to the best outcomes. At least it's one of the most important keys, I would say.
That's a good word. I forgot you guys are all friends too, so that's great. So Dina, go ahead, you pick it up now.
Sure. Well, like Mellody said, I'm so delighted to be with you today, Alex, and to be with Michelle and Mellody. I will give you my word and what I would tell a 22-year-old, but I was watching those videos and was just kind of overwhelmed by, in many ways, how far we have come as women and yet how far we have to go. But I think it's the small kind of victories that we have to really recognize. And I was telling Mellody earlier today how incredibly thrilled I was and emotional I was when Princeton named a building after her, Hobson College. To think that Mellody, who was the first in her family to go to university and to now replace what was once the Woodrow Wilson School, one of those names. I mean, it's really incredible. So I want to say a huge congratulations to my friend Mellody. It really does show so many young women what you're capable of, and it's incredible. I will tell you, my word for my career was taking risks. And I often tell young people that you have to be very careful when you're taking risks, but mine started out as a very young girl. I'm an immigrant to this country, and my parents used to say, Dina, we left our homeland so you and your sisters could pursue your dreams, anything you want to be, as long as you're a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. And so I dutifully got into law school and was heading that way when I had the chance to kind of jump off a cliff and take a leap of faith and a risk and actually go to Washington to work for another remarkable female trailblazer, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. And so taking risks, even when many people are telling you, you've got to do the narrow path, you've got to go to school, then go work at Ariel or Goldman or wherever for 2 years, and then go get your MBA. I mean, sometimes jumping off that path that has been so prescribed, if there's an opportunity that comes your way and taking a little bit of risk, I think actually is how you ultimately find the journey that's meant for you.
Oh, I'm very good at that. Okay, Michelle, how about you?
Well, first of all, I'm super, super excited. And Mellody, I had not heard that news, and that is so awesome and so incredibly well-deserved. There's not, a day, week, quarter, month that goes by that Mellody doesn't inspire me and all of us. So that just made my day. So thanks, Dina, for sharing that. I'm gonna blend two words here. So I'm gonna take some liberty. Maybe it's the risk Dina was talking about, but I would say grit and grace. And I think, for me, they've been really important. Just tenacity and persistence and hard work is, as Mel said, just drive to break through things has been really important in my career. But I think grace alongside it, to be humble about what you have to learn and to pick yourself up when you make mistakes and to, acknowledge when you were wrong. And, as a mom, especially, I think just trying to balance it and juggle it. And so I would say grit and grace. And I don't think I would think differently for a 22-year-old, maybe more resilience. It's a very, very hard time to be 22 and starting out in a company. We know that the pandemic has taken a disproportionate toll on women, on people of color, but also new to work. It's very hard to form a team and to establish bonds when everything is completely virtual. So maybe I'd add a little dose of resilience for the 22-year-old.
So well deserved. So they brought us there, Melody. So, Dina said it, I was going to address it later. But, you change the narrative. Like, you're not just in the room, but with the college being named after you within Princeton, you're changing the narrative. Like, my daughter's 6. If she ever goes to Princeton, she's not going to know it was anything different, but named after you. And that's an incredible feat. And I just wanted to get your take on what that was like.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, again, these are my pals. So, we celebrate and admire and root for each other. And I'm so proud to have them as such good friends for so long. So just thank you for those kind wishes. I love you guys, both of you, so much. And so admire you both for the careers you've had and the people that you are, most importantly. In terms of the effort at Princeton, they came to me last year and they said, we have this idea that we want to rename Wilson College for you. And obviously they wanted support to be able to rebuild the college, et cetera, which I was able to do. I was fortunately in the position to be able to do that with my family. But the reason I said yes had nothing to do with me. It was actually about the symbol of the transition from someone who, was president of the United States and did lots of things that were very important, but at the same time had very, very clear, well-expressed views around race and racism. And those views do not at all reflect the institution of Princeton today. There's just no question about it. And so that incongruent message with a name at the university was something that became compelling to me, that we could actually, my words, change the narrative, and that the building could be named after a modern person, not someone who passed away that you look back on, but someone who exists today that could demonstrate what is possible. And to go from being the first person in your family to go to college, go from a circumstance where sometimes we would get evicted or our phone would get disconnected, all these things happen to me, to have that moment where you could have a building, to me, and a college, more importantly, not just a building, a bunch of buildings. It really spoke to the idea for me of making sure everyone who walks on that campus understands that they belong. For some reason, when I went to Princeton when I was 18 years old, coming from Chicago, the youngest of 6 kids, and the first to go to college in my immediate family, for some reason, when I looked up at buildings that were named for Forbes and Rockefellers, I was not intimidated by it and felt that I belonged. But I recognized I was unusual. I want to make sure when they see Hobson, that they think to themselves that whomever it might be, she's like me. And therefore, not only is anything possible, but our past does not have to dictate our future, both as it relates to Princeton, as well as for those individuals and those families.
And you know what I love about Melody?
Go ahead, Michelle.
Also, what I love is, I think we're at this point in society where it's not just women saying women should be at the table, and people should look up and see who they want to be. I think we're finally at the point where there's a broader recognition and consensus that more diverse, more inclusive teams produce better results. And that, it's not universal, it's not as, kind of truly, end to end as we'd like it to be. But the fact that people will go to Princeton and see an extraordinary woman who has changed the landscape of America and everything she's done. And that's not, Melody knocking on Princeton's door, but Princeton saying, that's what we want for our university. That's who we want to reflect ourselves. And I do see that happening more and more. I think I don't think we'll make progress if it's women advocating for women. I think we make progress when there's a fundamental belief that more diverse, more inclusive teams, whether they're in courthouses, universities, White House, Congress, boardrooms, everywhere, academic institutions, that more diverse and inclusive teams produce better results. That's what has me passionate and excited about the work ahead, because it will be work. But I believe that the consensus is building.
I totally agree with Michelle. I remember when we launched an initiative at Goldman Sachs called 10,000 Women in 2007, way before everybody was talking about women's economic empowerment. I'm so proud now that everybody, it's almost a given. But one of the things that I was struck by at the time was how important it was, frankly, that the men of Goldman Sachs were the ones who said, we found our best investment. We look all day long for a return on our investment. And economically empowering women around the world is the greatest way to grow GDP. And so, Michelle, I do think we have to have those voices. I think now they're much louder, more present, and it does have to be everyone talking about that issue. I also think, though, that's why the Bloomberg New Voices program is so terrific. I think we take for granted just how hard it is to let your voice be heard, how to have that confidence that you need. Because I know, well, I'll speak for myself, but Melody and I've talked, and I know Michelle, I'm sure, has had similar experiences. But even when you have had the privilege to have a certain level of success, and when you've had the chance to make impact, and you've had the chance, hopefully, to reach back and mentor other women and bring them along, there's so often moments when you think, can I do this? Can I be the only woman in this room? Will I achieve this goal? To this day, I often think that. And I have to say that it's that confidence gap sometimes that holds women back. And so finding voices, helping women find their voices is so incredibly critical. And we've seen that in a lot of the work that we've done. And I've certainly seen that with many of my friends and supporters too.
So let me pick up on that, Dina. So what's the right way to measure it? Because you're right, 10,000 Women in 2007 was way ahead of its time. But I think that everyone's really trying to struggle with what's the best way to implement these changes. I mean, there's quotas, right? That's sort of the obvious one. There's the push within boardrooms, sure. But then there also needs to be some kind of accountability that goes along with it. And then there's going to be people that are just not going to budge. They're just not going to see things differently. And unconscious bias is a real thing. So I'd love to get all of your takes on sort of what concrete measures can be done to get us there that are real, not just sort of sex washing or race washing,
So,
So I'll start. Oh. No, go.
Michelle, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Well, we had I'm sure we're going to say something similar, actually, knowing our conversations and Dina too here. But I authored a study 18 months ago, 2,300 C-suite execs. And we said, first, let's look at the companies that are producing better business results. And then let's look at the gender and racial equity of these companies at every level of the organization. So 2,300 companies, 60 countries, dozens of industries. And what was really fascinating to me was 13% of companies outperformed, and they had one correlated factor. They had more diverse and inclusive teams all the way at the top. So then we asked the questions, of course, as you would, why? How do you do that? And for them, it's a very simple formula. It's a business priority. It's a business priority. And like any business priority, if you believe that more inclusive, more diverse teams produce better business results, you have visibility. It's a board objective. There are measurements. There are metrics. You're punished and rewarded for hitting those things. You invest. It's just not a nice to have. It's not wouldn't this be great? And what those companies told us is, actually, the formula is not so complicated. You set it as a business priority. You set very clear targets, goals, whatever you want to call them. You hold yourselves accountable. And by the way, there's more opportunity in the world. We know how to take bias out of recruiting. We know how to take, some bias out of compensation. We know, there's so many best practices that have emerged. So if you formally designate this as a priority and you hold yourselves accountable, it's the fastest business priority you can make progress on. It's the easiest thing to do. So to me, that is the game changer. And to your point, will some people not believe? Yes. Will some people kick their heels and scream and drag their feet? Sure. But the data speaks for itself. And I want to get behind making that 13% of companies 26, 50, et cetera. That to me is our path to success.
Melody, do you want to add on?
Sure. Well, there are a few things. First of all, this is the only area in corporate America where we talk about how we try and we don't change the results. And, you know, as many people know, I married Yoda's dad, who said, do or do not, there is no try. You don't get points for just, as I was the case when I was in second grade, showing my work on a math problem but getting the wrong answer. So I think we have to be very specific about the fact that, and I believe this wholeheartedly, if you want to be a world-class company in the 21st century and you're not diverse, you are committing corporate suicide. It's not a question of if you will die, it's just a question of when. Now, it could go for a very, very long time, but it won't work over the long term. I'm actually even wondering, when we think about risks that companies have to disclose in their proxies, if we're going to start seeing race as a risk for those companies that are not diverse, just like they disclose environmental risks or legal risks or all sorts of things that might exist. If they have exposure there, how much could that hurt them and erode shareholder value over the long term? I believe incentives are very important. In corporate America, you get what you incent. We are completely and totally used to incentives. We're incented around earnings, around sales, in my business, around investment results versus benchmarks. It is part and parcel of the world that we live in. If it's important, it counts, start counting, and then hold people accountable. We are used to that. If there is no accountability, if there are no incentives, it's a nice to have, not a need to have. We know that we respond to incentives as a business. Last thing, we talk about the 3 Ps. You need to count people. No multicultural umbrellas. No putting women and minorities in one group and feeling good about your 20 or 30% number. Because when you start breaking that apart by ethnicity, you see the underrepresentation. And that's what's important. You need to account at the top of the organization, through the C-suite, all the way through the organization. No pats on your back if your numbers are dramatically affected by the fact that you have 90% Black women as assistant. It doesn't work. The other thing you need to count is business diversity. The old supplier diversity language is last century. With whom do you do business? And understand across all of the categories, especially the big ones, financial services, professional services, technology, are you including diverse firms in your spend? Corporate America today spends about 2% of their money with minority vendors, and their stated goal is 12 to 13%. We have a very long way to go. That's the Fortune 500. Last but not least, philanthropy. I'm very worried that's the tail that's wagging the dog. You know, there's a lot of virtue signaling going on with donations. I'm delighted that unbelievably great organizations like the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund and so many others are getting those donations, but you can only fix your house from within, not without. And so believing that a donation will absolve you of really going in and doing the work will not work. And last but not least, and I'm sorry to have such a long answer, the thing about the world that we live in today that my friends know so well, the world is going to hold us accountable. Whatever we say we're going to do, if we don't do it, the virtual nature of this world with our own teammates inside of our companies, with our shareholders, with our vendors, with just everyday people, is going to force us to change the narrative if we're not willing to change it ourselves.
Well said. We need to raise a glass. Yeah.
I actually have a question that kind of dovetails with this conversation, so I just want to bring it in. So the question is, how do we as women get our voices heard with male leadership without being misconstrued as difficult or not nice? I would go a little further and to say things like we're not aggressive or shrill or ignored when we get assertive. It's a good question. You can do things with your numbers, but you can still have that bias in the room. How do you fix that? Dina, I'll just start with you because you didn't get to say the thing before. So Dina, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. Well, the one quick thing on the thing before that just adds so much to what Melody and Michelle said was that if you don't measure it, you don't mean it. And a year ago, our CEO, David Solomon, announced that we would no longer take any company public that didn't have a diverse board member, and within 2 years, 2 diverse board members. You would think that that would not be so challenging. And so it was so interesting to see how much that has moved the ball forward. forward and how many women that call us now and say, I got a call after that announcement. So 100% agree. It just can't be the fuzzy talk anymore, like Melody said. It's got to be real, actionable, and accountable steps. On the, how to be in the room. I mean, I love what Michelle said about grit and grace. Let's be honest. Women are judged on both, and there is often that question of, am I being too aggressive? And I think that one of my mentors, Secretary Condoleezza Rice, who I worked for, often would just kind of wow me in many different situations, but she was always the most prepared person in the room, not woman in the room. She always knew more about the issue, knew imagined what questions would be asked, was tough as nails. And it was always such a lesson for me that you need to be more prepared than anybody else if you're the only woman in the room. And frankly, you need to have the courage behind your sentiments. I'll tell you a quick story. In 2005 and 2006, when I would travel with her to the Middle East in a very tense period of time after the years after 9/11, we would be sitting when she had meetings with kings and crown princes and lots of very senior officials in the region. And they would sometimes say to her, we don't want to hear your lecturing. We don't want to hear about freedom and democracy. When she would talk about the importance of reform and the equity of women in their countries and human rights. And I remember her saying, well, I'm certainly not here to lecture you. In fact, it wasn't all that long ago that my own country counted me as 3/5 of a man. And so while we are not perfect in the United States, we are progressing in our journey. And that's all that I hope that you will for your people, progress in that path, on that path. And I was just struck by the remarkable way she could sort of stick it to them, but with humility, a sense of, where our country has come from.
And facts. That's fact-based.
And so that's always, remained a really important lesson to me. And final thing that I'll say, I love listening to Lonnie talk about, all the women in history, and the Smithsonian has done such a great job capturing that. But I think they've got to also have some new messages. There's a very famous speech that Theodore Roosevelt once gave about the men in the arena, the man in the arena who gets in and he fails many times. He gets dusted up and bloodied. And I think we've got to start talking about the woman in the arena and that it is okay to fail. I think the biggest fear that women have today is that sense, like you said, Alex, of will I come off too aggressive? Will I not be loud enough? Will I be graceful and show grit? And I think we've got to just say, guys, it's okay, because honestly, for me, I have grown the most when I have failed and made mistakes.
Maybe just two quick add-on thoughts. Dina said that so well. But Dina, when you're talking about Condoleezza Rice, and I know this is true about both of you, there's an authenticity. Don't let other people define you and shake you. I think that's so hard. I know sometimes I get so flustered if the tone is really aggressive, or if you feel like you're, there's so many men in the room and just you. But I think that quiet confidence that, I know who I am. I know what my style is. I know I've done the work. I have the data, holding true to who you are ends up being, I think, really important, and not letting the environment define how you react and how you respond. And the second thing I would just say is echo and amplify someone else's voice. Often, thankfully, we're not the only woman in the room. We may be one of only two or three, but there was a great Washington Post story, and Melody and Dina may have been here, but about the Obama administration and how women consciously echoed each other. I loved what Dina said. Let's go back to the point that Melody made. I think that, just the idea of echoing each other and amplifying each other's voices is very powerful too.
That is such a great point. Actually, I never thought of it like that before. It's like a different way of mentoring in the moment. So let's tie a couple things together. There's another question that says, they'd love for you to speak to your career when you realized you were one of the only women in the room, and then how you opened doors for other women. And Melody, I'd love to just ask you too, because you also had to battle being the only African American in the room and the only woman. I mean, that's like double the hill. Can you talk a little bit about the moment that you realized, okay, I'm here, but I'm still the only one? And then the moment where it got a little easier, can you walk us through that kind of transition?
Yes, they call the Black woman, they say we have double jeopardy. So we're both, we have the race and gender that we are trying to overcome in one fell swoop. I never saw it as a burden. I still don't. And I took a very different approach. So I started in the investment business and I would go to conferences. I'm 22 years old. I know nothing about nothing. I'm very, very rare in the room. I'm a unicorn before there was even such a term. And I remember having a situation where people would come up to me and they would address me by my first name. And it would be a situation where I didn't know the person, hadn't had the experience of being in that forum before, et cetera. And I started to realize, oh, I'm the only one. I stand out so much that they actually know me before I know them. And I realized I could use that to my advantage. So I became Melody. They didn't even have to know my last name. And I joke, it was like Cher or Beyonce. It was like this, because I was so unique, I started to use that to my advantage. Saying because I'm the only one, I could be potentially the most memorable. And in being the most memorable, let me make sure, first and foremost, I'm studied in my subject matter. I think confidence comes from knowing what you're talking about. And then secondly, that I have an original idea. So I've always worked very, very hard to bring an original idea into the room. I go to board meetings where I'll spend plane rides coming up with what is my original idea, which often is said in the form of a question, so that I can distinguish myself in terms of my thought process. I literally, to this day, consciously do that. And so I think being in the room, recognizing that when you're the only one, recognizing that's not necessarily negative, it can be an incredible positive, although I want a lot more people in the room with me. I like company, and I don't buy into the first and only as something to be proud of. And then secondly, when you get there and you have something to say, distinguish your voice from those around you.
That's such a great image. Can you give me an example, though, of one thing where you thought on the plane where you're like, here's my question, here's my idea? I'd love to know.
I have so many. They're obviously very specific often to the companies that I'm in. So it's hard to be that direct with you with an answer without, revealing conversations in a boardroom, which I would never do.
Melody's always thought-provoking. That's the thing. It's
and I was like, wow, that's a really good way of saying that in a question form. I like that.
Well, if you ask it in a question form, it's less threatening. So it goes back to your point about ambition and too aggressive. A question becomes less threatening. Statements are threatening. And that's where I learned that there's a difference. And I will ask a series of questions. Michelle has seen me do it. Dina has seen me do it, to bird dog an issue without being a jerk. But it's like, oh, did you think about this? Then I'll think of the follow-up. The follow-up is always more important than the first question. The first question is just setting up the issue. It's always the follow-up that really matters. You know that as a person who does this professionally. And so I will use my string of questions to actually allow a subject matter to reveal itself to the rest of the group. It's particularly helpful around issues of race or gender or things like that. Tell me about the numbers. Tell me about how many people, what base are we using? If we're doubling, what's the against what? It's like, sounds great, but I don't know what the base is. 1% to 2% doesn't sound so great to me.
I'm literally taking notes to be like, next time in my meeting. So we have more questions to get through that I wanted to just hit on as well. So this is a good one. Michelle, I'll ask you, because you do a lot of work with teams and you're really into team culture. And the question is, how do you stay motivated when you feel so defeated sometimes? Are there indicators that you should just like throw in the towel and try something else? And I'm sure we've all, I felt that in the last year where you're like, I just can't do this anymore. I'm just gonna do something else. And it sucks and it's not fun. What do you do, Michelle, when you got there?
Well, I think a few thoughts. First of all, we all feel like that. I probably had an hour today when I felt like that. So that's just part and parcel of having ambitious lives, right? That's part of the territory. I think you always, it's that really important skill of two things. One, always understanding what the outcomes you're trying to achieve. You can't get too passionate about the way you can't get so wedded about the way to get there that you can't ask those probing questions that Melody was asking to figure out if you're on the right course or not. So, try never to get so wedded to the way you're getting to an outcome that you dig in and entrench yourself and you don't say, you know what, the data is kind of pointing us in a different direction, or this isn't working, we should try something else. So stay passionate about the outcome and always kind of be willing and thoughtful about how you get there, because I think it'll produce more creativity, more innovation, more curiosity, et cetera. And then the second thing is, when your energy is flagging, all of us need to know what builds our energy back up. I think I was talking to someone the other day, actually an amazing woman who we all know, and Melody's on the board of her company. And she was talking about like what gives her that energy to charge back up that hill. For me, that's being with the team. When I've had a bunch of bad meetings, tough things and whatever, and I'm in the office, I want to walk the floors and just hang out with the most junior people who are working on, who are in agile squads, doing really interesting work. That gives me a lot of energy. Of course, at home, it's my kids and my family, but I think I know when to call it. I know when to say, I'm blowing up this meeting and I'm going to walk the halls. Now, I can't do that virtually, so we're coming up with all new ways. But there's nothing more motivating and inspiring for me than to get out of the, sort of corporate hierarchy and to get down with the people who are trying and testing and learning and growing. And so I would say both those things. Stay passionate and wedded to the outcome, not to the means of getting there, so that you can have an open, curious mind and know what builds your energy and fill it up.
These are amazing ideas. I love them. There's another one, Dina. This is also the questions are fantastic. This is one that says, how do we get the men in the room to give up their power and their space? And this is such an important one, and I've seen it where you have women in the right roles, but they still don't have the right voice. The power is still skewed to the men. And Dina, having worked in government, I can only imagine like what you would have seen in that respect as well. So what do you think?
Well, that's sadly, besides finance and corporate America, certainly government, there are not enough women in the room, especially in national security rooms and positions. And yet you think about how important it is to have diversity of thought when some of those crucial decisions are being made. I think it's a little bit what Michelle said is, at least you have to hope there's at least another woman in the room, and that you echo their voice, and that you bring, together some good ideas. But I've obviously been in some rooms like Melody and Michelle have been with some pretty, very senior CEOs, very senior businessmen. And I think that you actually do have to kind of say, listen, I really have something that I would like to add to this conversation. A lesson that I learned early on from another mentor was be still, be quiet as the meeting opens. Listen to what the big issues are going to be. It's a little bit like Melody's original idea. Don't be the first voice, but be the best voice. And what I have often found is it's the greatest thing when they turn to you and say, what do you think? Well, we've been talking for 30 minutes and we think we're brilliant. How do you what do you think? Do you think we're as good as we think we are? It's just like a typical, job interview, right? Where a woman, when presented with an idea from one of her bosses, says, I'm just not sure if I'm capable of that. And the man is thinking, why didn't they ask me 5 years ago? I'm going to crush this job. But even in those meetings where big decisions are being made, I have watched, in just my own case, waiting until everybody loves to talk and then sort of coming in and saying, have we thought about this? Or here's a really good way to think about moving forward. And I think that strength of poise and stillness and strength is something that really works. And I also think, just one last thing to add on to Michelle talking about teams. One question that we should all ask, and I think we should ask each other and hold ourselves accountable, but a question I think every woman in a senior position should be asked is, where are all the women that worked for you? And I think that is such a critical legacy. How many women that worked for you got promoted? And not just when they were under your immediate supervision, but afterwards, when they went to another division, when they went on with their careers, were you constantly there, cheerleading, advising, helping, most importantly, giving the tough love and constructive criticism? And when you look around, at the end of your career, will you be able to say, those incredible women that worked for me have exceeded anything that I could have achieved and are in senior positions all around? And so that's an original question for Melody that maybe we can all get into the dialogue of asking each other.
If I could just add one point, Dina, I agree with everything you said. Just one thing about that question that I just would reframe if it were me. It's not asking the men in the room to give up power, it's asking them to share it. And I think if you can get out of the win-lose conversation, I think it's a very different conversation. And, I remember one of our friends, Michelle has the same friend, he once said to us, do you share or do you hoard power? Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to create a road for people to share power. You remember that conversation, Michelle. Mm-hmm. It still sticks with me. And the question is about sharing power. If you're the person who's trying to weigh in and create a better outcome for your organization, you have to create a mindset that my idea is going to help this person look better. It's a very different way of thinking about things. It's somewhat from that book, Art of War, that you have to crouch to conquer sometimes. There were plenty of times I've been in a room with others, very, very, very powerful men. And I'm like, I can make them look really good. And ultimately, they will come to rely on me to help them. And if you can become that person, you find yourself in more and more conversations, then you actually do become the go-to person. I remember being in rooms all the time when people would like give me assignments. I'm like, I'm a peer. But then I was like, no, go do the assignment and slay it. Just slay it every single time. And then they want you to be involved more and more and more. Then you actually are consultative. But some people would see that as a real negative. Like I'm being treated like I'm less than. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do the work and exceed expectations.
This is a great conversation. I honestly could talk to you guys for the next 7 hours, but we are out of time for this portion of the evening. So, Adina, Michelle, and Melody, it was truly inspiring. Thank you for all the specifics. You nailed so many points that I think a lot of us feel in the workplace and sort of how to manage it and nuances of how to deal with it. So, thank you. And we're so pleased that you are still in the room. Our program now continues. We're going to take a look forward as we build the next generation of voices.
At the end of 2017, we decided to take a hard look at the actual numbers, both in terms of our representation and our stories, but also on our TV programming and our radio programming. And the numbers really surprised us. About 10% of our outside guests that were brought onto TV were women.
I think we all can agree that the industry would be far better off for being more diverse.
What we heard from the bookers was that either they said that they couldn't find the women, there weren't women in the right roles that they were looking for, or if they found the woman didn't feel comfortable going on TV. And we thought the one thing that we could actually impact was this issue of the training. And we created an initiative called New Voices in 2018 to offer 4-hour one-on-one training for each woman that we brought in, to give them some video experience, some feedback, to learn about their messaging.
This is what I would say. I think quarterly earnings, we all get extremely focused on. It's a really good training. And what I really learned is just understanding sometimes you may not want to answer that question and just being able to pivot to something else entirely and getting your point across.
Something that really impressed me about this initiative is that it is without any expectation and the program is fully confidential.
It's not necessary to go on Bloomberg TV after this. The idea is that you will be TV ready to voice your opinions, to share your perspective. The ultimate goal from a journalistic standpoint is that we have better programming, that we have more interesting conversations at events and hearing opinions that we may not otherwise have voiced.
The only way to really achieve those goals is to have that representation within the financial news.
So we've more than doubled the percentage of women experts on our TV and radio.
Why do you think tech executives are putting their money and their muscle behind this now? I see the difference when we have more female voices on our show. There are new ideas, new insights.
Anyone really who's looking to grow professionally in their career, it's a fantastic opportunity to take up.
Hi, I'm Laura Zelenko, and I am a senior executive editor at Bloomberg, and I lead our New Voices initiative. I'm just so honored to have been able to work with the Smithsonian on this event, and it's beating all expectations. It's just so amazing, and I'm grateful to everyone who has given their time to participate and help further these important discussions and these important initiatives. I know that the real power, the North Star of New Voices, is to literally change the voices of who we have speaking about business and finance in media. And we're already seeing this happen in two ways. Many of the women who have taken part in the program are appearing regularly not only on Bloomberg TV, but on our competitors' outlets in cities all across the world. And then there's a powerful knock-on effect on these women's careers. Remember, at Bloomberg, our coverage focuses heavily on industries that are still quite male-dominated, namely finance, but also sectors like technology and energy. And these industries haven't made it easy for the smart and accomplished women and other underrepresented experts to amplify their views and opinions externally or internally. Now we are seeing executives who participate in the training get promotions or added responsibilities. And in turn, they are impacting the way their own firms view representation. And the firms are realizing they need to start putting forward more diversity when we come calling for guests on TV or sources for stories, because it matters. It matters in terms of how the firms are perceived, and it matters greatly to how strong and accurate and complete our coverage is. What we at Bloomberg are working hard to do, along with many others in the media industry, is to change patterns of behavior that have led many journalists to speak to the same white male experts over and over again, and in so doing, silence the voices of other equally, if not more, important experts. As Mellody Hobson has done with her investment at Princeton, we must change the narrative if we are ever going to cause durable, systemic change and keep the women in the room. I'm still often baffled when I see New Voices alumni on TV and wonder, how is it possible that these incredibly accomplished executives weren't on our radar at all before? I now understand the frustration many must have felt to not see their female peers and equals a part of the conversation. How is it possible that we've missed their insights, their perspectives, their opinions all this time? Well, one of these women is Sherry Paul. She's a managing director and senior portfolio manager at UBS. Since taking part in New Voices, Sherry has appeared many times on Bloomberg as well as on Fox Business and on CNBC. She has been recognized by Forbes as a top private wealth advisor in America and leads one of the few all-female private wealth teams. And she understands the importance of being a role model. Sherry was the originator of Girls Take Wall Street, an impactful initiative done in collaboration with Bloomberg Philanthropies, which began in New York and then expanded to cities around the world, to change the face of finance one girl at a time by inspiring the next generation of women in the industry. I saw this initiative firsthand in New York and in Mumbai, and it was truly overwhelming. And you can see here some of the pictures from the girls taking over the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to have Sherry here to talk about this important work. And then to close out the evening, we'll hear from Julissa Marenko, the Smithsonian's Assistant Secretary for Communications and External Affairs, on the museum's own initiatives to help change the narrative for women and girls and how you can participate. Over to you, Sherry.
Wow. Thank you, Laura. It's so heartfelt in such a personal way to have been invited into this room, frankly. I think it's no secret that women are missing from Wall Street and in the financial services industry as a whole. And frankly, I find myself in this room with all of you today because other women spotting me in that room elevated me and invited me into this moment with all of you to share something with you that is also near and dear to my heart, which is Girls Take Wall Street, which is basically an inspired initiative, as Laura said, to change the face of finance one girl at a time. And the inspiration and background for the program really sits with those of us that have sat in these rooms, in those elevators, in the halls of finance, without good and diverse company. And so the reason that the program focuses on high school girls is that we also know that's when girls tend to drop out of math and science, which puts them on a course within college that sort of conflicts them out of two of the most important wealth creating sectors that you can work in, finance and tech. And we also know that 2/3 of student debt right now is held by girls. And once they get out of college, if they're pathing into careers that don't necessarily pay well, they're carrying that debt with them and then often getting paid a third, 20 cents, 50 cents on the dollar to their male counterparts. And so why not start with girls? Why not start with helping them see themselves differently by inviting them into a space that otherwise they may not be able to initially envision themselves in? And so we focused the program on first generation high school graduates here in New York City. And as Laura mentioned, we were able to bring the program live around the world, starting in Mumbai. But I felt like it was really important to start with the girls who are first, because that's really where we tend to sort of look at ourselves and wonder if we do belong. And Melody, I think, said it best, when the power of knowing that you're invited into a space can change the way that we see ourselves. And our past isn't necessarily our future. And so the program was really twofold. One, we brought in over 100 girls into the headquarters of UBS and the financial firms, shared with Bloomberg. And the importance of that to me in terms of the girls seeing themselves in critical mass was I didn't want them to be looking in the room and not seeing themselves. So why not have 100 of their friends join them? And for a day of basic financial literacy and boot camp, because my other belief is that money equality for women begins with money education with girls. And so the program is very much centered on the practical skills. Yes, we want you to dream bigger, but we also want you to know how to achieve those goals. And so skills building around career and money power and finance and understanding how debt works and college loans, empowering these girls. And then the culmination of the end of the day was really traveling down to the New York Stock Exchange and ringing the closing bell and literally taking over Wall Street was the concept here. Now, that concept, my background was I was a civil rights activist before I came into finance. And actually I came into finance because I learned in my civil rights work that money, when weaponized for good, can change the world. And I wanted to learn about how that all worked. And so the second part of taking over the exchange and taking over the corporate environment is really a symbolic one, where we literally wanted the hallways and the elevators of the financial companies to wonder what was happening. So one of my favorite moments actually was watching, 15 girls at 7:30 in the morning. We had to stack them into the elevators to get them up into the boardroom to begin the curriculum. And literally one of my male colleagues, who I love, he's standing in the elevator, surrounded by, high school girls, all diverse. And he looks at me and goes, "What's going on today?" And I looked at him and went, "The future." And it's moments like that I think can change the corporate culture as well. Lastly, in going down to the exchange, we felt like it was really important to do that. Why? Because at the time, there was only one female trader on the floor, and we wanted her to have company. And so we brought the girls to the exchange. It was amazing watching them interact with the traders. And in the end, they drew straws to who got to go into the balcony to ring the closing bell. And the symbolism there is, in a capitalist democracy, the right to vote isn't the only center of power. We have to have access to money if we want to become fully equal as women in a capitalist democracy. And the truth is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg knew this. She's been laying the bricks for us to move forward in this next iteration for women's equality by giving us access to having mortgages and bank accounts and credit cards without male co-signers. So why not bring that symbolism into the beating heart of capitalism here in the United States with ringing of the closing bell? Now, in closing, what I'd like to do is read to you a LinkedIn message that I just got from one of the girls that participated in our program in Mumbai, which was the 1-year anniversary for this was on Friday. And, enough from the adults, let's hear it from the girls. This is from Pratim. Such a fantastic experience it was. That day I went back home with one resolution. Finance would never take a back seat for me henceforth. Knowing the markets, knowing your own money gave me an altogether different feeling of independence. And on that note, it's my distinct pleasure to hand this off to Julissa. And thank you all again for including me in this room.
Hi, thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you so much to Laura and the Bloomberg New Voices team for this incredible and amazing partnership with the Smithsonian. Grit, grace, hard work, risk-taking, these are all and some of the reasons as to why at the Smithsonian we launched the American Women's History Initiative, because of her story, now nearly 2 years ago. This initiative is one of the country's most ambitious undertakings to research, collect, document, display, and share the compelling and inclusive stories of American women. Our goal is to ensure that the historical record of women is recognized accurate, and well-known, not just at the Smithsonian, but all across the world. Those stories that we've heard of today, those opportunities for us to share the grit, the grace, the hard work that women, not just in the finance industry, but throughout the history of our country have displayed is what we are trying to do. Simply stated, we are correcting the record. We're correcting the record through our exhibitions, our educational programs, through robust programs like this digital presence that we have right now, as well as through our partnership with Wikipedia. Today I'm here to invite you to be a part of two of our current efforts. 2 weeks ago, the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative opened up its landmark exhibition at the National Museum of American History, entitled Girlhood, It's Complicated. I think we can all relate. Prior to being the women that we are today, we all went through a girlhood, and for the most part, it was complicated. It showcases how girls from Helen Keller to Naomi Wedler have spoken up, have challenged expectations, and have been on the front lines of social change. Through unexpected stories of girlhood, the exhibition engages audiences in a timely conversation about women today and throughout history. I invite you to visit us, not just at our museum, but also online. The second invitation I'd like to extend to you is with regards to how can we as a community come together. So early on in the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative, we learned that we had to address the gender gap, not just at our museums, not just in our content, and not just in our exhibitions, but also online. With our partnership with Wikipedia, we learned that the representation of women on Wikipedia was quite thin. Less than 18%, if you will, of Wikipedia biographies in English are about women. And men make up more than 80% of the editors. We saw these statistics as opportunities. With a dedicated team of volunteers and staff at the Smithsonian, we are adding Wikipedia stories and images for and about women. As we all know, Wikipedia is one of the world's largest go-to search engines for looking up information. So this matters. It matters most especially because no one likes half of the story. So I invite you to join us as we echo some of the words that we heard today from Dina and Michelle, right? To echo and empower each other's voices, but I'm inviting you to do it online. Thus far, our results have been heartening. We've tracked more than 2.7 million views of Smithsonian trusted content, including some of our very own stories of our women in science. Some of our images have been viewed hundreds of thousands of times thus far. And so again, I ask of you and I invite you to help us echo, empower each other's voices, not just in our museums, but also online. Later this month, on October 29th, we will be hosting a Women in Finance Wikipedia Edit-a-thon online, in which we'll all have an opportunity to come together to highlight trailblazing women from finance and from business. I hope you can join us. And I thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor for us to be a part of this partnership. Thank you. Back to you, Alex.
All right. Thank you so much, you guys. This was truly an amazing evening. A huge thanks to the Smithsonian for partnering with us. A huge thanks to Melody Hobson, Dina Powell, Michelle Paluzzo for sharing their experiences as well. So here's how you can help change the narrative. There are links now on the screen to find out more about the New Voices program, which will accept its next round of applicants in early 2021. It's amazing. You have to do it. And the Smithsonian's Women's History Initiatives, including information on the Girlhood and Wikipedia Edit-a-thon. Check that out as well. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Hopefully we can do this again in person next time. Have a great night.